Hey everybody, welcome back to Vinyl Junkie Record Shop. My name is Mike, and today I'm going to be bringing you my favorite 20 metal releases of 2021. Again, I want to preface this by saying I'm not saying that these are the best or most artistic albums that came out throughout the year. These are simply 20 of the ones that I found myself listening to and enjoying the most. Totally subjective analysis for this list. So I'm not going to do any kind of in-depth review of each album. I'm going to try to go through these fairly quickly so you can watch. I hope you'll enjoy and see where some of these albums appeared on your lists that are out there. I do always kind of like to find a release here or there that nobody else has really talked about, but I don't do that for sake of the list. If I didn't like it, it wouldn't be on here. So again, really subjective. We'll just go through here. Let's get started. I want to do one honorable mention. This is an album that will appear on another video that I'm going to do for my favorite rock albums. This, not really a metal release, but close enough to I feel like it warranted an inclusion here. So we're going to start with the debut album from Richie Kotzen and Adrian Smith. This is really good hard rock, blues-based hard rock, guitar slinging kind of anthems that you'd expect from late 70s, 80s bands. You'll hear a little bit of, Bad Company, Led Zeppelin. You'll hear all those influences on this album. Not really metal, but really good guitar-driven hard rock. If you were expecting something along the lines of Iron Maiden because it's got Adrian Smith in it, you're not going to get that. But give this a listen. I think you'll enjoy it. All right, so let's start with number 20. This is another one of those rarities, I think. There's a lot of hype for this band within the metal community as far as their up-and-coming status in the U.S. metal scene. This is a band out of Dallas, Texas. This is Steel Bearing Hand with Sleigh and Hell. And what you're going to get with the Steel Bearing Hand is a blackened thrash kind of style of speed metal, really raw production, raw early 80s styled vocals. Nearly all of these bands that play with that style have somewhat of a sound of like Kronos in their vocal delivery, and you'll get that with this band. So very raw, nice up and coming metal band out of the U.S. Steel Bearing Hand. All right, at number 19, this is, I believe, the only Canadian band to appear on the list, and maybe the only black metal album per se. Black metal is not my go-to genre. So if I'm going to listen to black metal, there's got to be a lot of other stuff going on along with it, and that's what we get with this band. This is Wormwich with the album Wolf Hex. There's the back. Looks like that ought to be the front, but I believe this is really kind of the back. I'm going to read the hype sticker to kind of give you an idea what you're going to get with Wormwich. Interlacing black metal and high-energy rock and roll with gothic, melodic, and harmonic flourishes. Pretty much what you get. And when you get a song title like Canadian Denim Mountain Attack, where you can get all the elements of that kind of like Icelandic black metal guitar riffing and really fast drumming, intermingling, seamlessly transitioning between that and D-beat style of punk and roll to traditional new wave of traditional metal flavoring. So you're going to get all that spread out through the tracks that are on this album. So there's that for you. All right, at number 18, this was the first album that I bought from 2021, and a band that I was not familiar with before this year. A straightforward death metal album from Australians, the Werewolves. This is What a Time to Be Alive. Love that album cover. It just looks so brutal and violent. You got this, this kind of beastly looking, looks like a lady, based on the bosom there. And she's just strangling the ever-living shit out of this guy on the bottom who can't hit her with his scythe. They all look like some kind of monsters, but the brutality on this album cover is basically what you're going to get with this album. Just listen to the song, lead off track, I Don't Like You, and its seething lyrics that are, a little tongue-in-cheek. Hopefully they don't hate the human race like they would sound in this, but this is just grab you by the throat death metal that doesn't let up, but I really liked it. All right. At 17, another band that was a new band for me to come across this year. This is an up-and-coming band out of New York. They mix, again, kind of genre blending. It's primarily death metal, but there's kind of a lot of traditional New York hardcore leanings going on in here in the album that kind of breaks it up and gives it a little more diversity than just being solid blast-beating death metal. This is Tombstoner with Victims of Vile Torture, a band on Redefining Darkness Records. Great up-and-coming label with some great up-and-coming bands. Opening track, title track, Victims of Vile Torture, just as rooted in knuckle-dragging caveman, groovy death metal riffs that just plummet your head and pummel your head. Plummet means you fall from great height. But just roundhouse punches to the head and neck area, full of thick guitar riffs with enough vocal diversity in there. You've got it's not all straightforward death gurgling sounding vocals. Breaks it up a little bit, so there's a melodic sensibility to it all. But very catchy, very memorable up and coming band, Tombstoner. All right, number 16. I should have kept a list or notes. 20, 19, 18. Yeah, so number 16. Another up-and-coming American metal band. This time we switch gears and go from the East Coast out to the West Coast, Pacific Northwest. This is Bewitcher with Cursed Be Thy Kingdom. If you're not familiar with Bewitcher, they play kind of that black and dirty speed rock sound that is, probably associated closely with Motorhead and Venom and early Metallica. This particular album has a little more, dare I say, commercial appeal to it, but it doesn't sacrifice the heaviness. Really good songwriting, really memorable tunes. Satanic Magic Attack being one of my favorites. Really good album, good songwriting, great album, great band to see live. If you get a chance to see Bewitcher come through your town, make sure you go and check them out. They got a lot of energy that they bring to the stage. All right, and number 15, a heavy metal legend. Anything that a guy like this does should be featured as something that's one of the best of in the year. Granted, there's been a lot of talk about this album being cheesy and lyrically it's not very deep, and that's okay. It's heavy metal. What I want in my heavy metal is guitar, and one of my favorite guitar players of all time is KK Downing, and this is KK's Priest with Sermons of the Sinner. Love that album cover. It's just, KK is just such an iconic image, and you can even tell with his blonde locks here and his Priest guitar sling that he means business. And, interesting, or of note, if you're not familiar with this album, he's paired up with Ripper Owens to deliver the vocals. Ripper replaced Rob Halford for a couple of albums back in the day with Priest. And, just really solid heavy metal vocals, heavy metal guitar, heavy metal songwriting. Heavy metal. What more could you ask for? KK's Priest. Coming in at 15. All right, number 14. This was another one of the early albums that I bought this year. From first listen, I thought this was really good. Death metal is, again, not my go-to thing, but this is more of a slower, not necessarily death doom, but maybe you're not as much blast beating as you get with your traditional idea of what death metal is. But another legend in the genre from Martin Van Druenen's Asphyx. This is Necroceros, and this thing is just really heavy. A lot of caveman riffing, a lot of big, thick, meaty sounds. Again, it doesn't rely on speed to make it heavy, which is what I like about my death metal. And a vocal performance from Van Drunen that's, he's got a unique voice within that particular genre. So fans of death metal should not be disappointed with Asphyx. All right, coming in at 13. This is maybe a little surprisingly low on the list. One of my favorite bands of all time. I just, of their last 3 releases, this is a great album. It's got great performances. It's solidly written, great production. The songs are good. I'm one of those guys that feels like it has pretty much one speed, and that's fast, and that's something that this band hasn't done a whole lot of throughout their career. And it doesn't sacrifice the overall satisfaction sound isn't sacrificed by that. I just would have liked to have seen maybe a little more diversity within the songwriting, maybe a few slower, more traditional moshing kind of riffs, because this band has delivered plenty of those over the years too. But anyway, this is Arizona's Flotsam and Jetsam with Blood in the Water. Eric A.K. sounds phenomenal on vocals on this thing. Really strong songs all the way from Blood in the Water, Burn the Sky, Brace for Impact, 7 Seconds Till the End of the World. That's a track I like. Again, like I said, really good. Of the last 3 Flotsam and Jetsam albums, this is probably number 3 for me. But they've all been great, so I'm really not criticizing anything here. Newest addition, Ken Mary on drums, really propels this thing. He's a fantastic drummer, and he fills the seat very well that was vacated by Jason Bittner when he went to go into Overkill. So Flotsam and Jetsam at 13. Number 12, another album that I listened to an awful lot before I actually committed to buying it. I'm not sure why I really waited so long. There's a lot of depth and diversity to this album from another classic death metal band, although you could debate whether or not they should have that death metal moniker. They were certainly one of, if not the leading bands in the new wave of Swedish heavy metal revival of heavy music back in the 90s. And that's At the Gates. And this is The Nightmare of Being. And if you're familiar with At the Gates, you kind of know what you're going to get here, except that there's a lot of experimentation, I think, going on within this album. There's a lot of progressive elements to this that you maybe wouldn't expect listening to other albums in their discography. There's some jazz breakdowns, some fusion breakdown, not jazz, but there's some instrumental breakdown passages in here that are very well steeped in the 70s prog rock. And it takes you on there's little curves and hills and valleys that you wouldn't expect from a straight death metal album, and that makes it very enjoyable. There's even a bit of saxophone on here, and being a former sax man myself, I gotta love it when you can incorporate a saxophone into your death metal. So At the Gates, The Nightmare of Being, that comes in at number 12. Number 11, we've got a solo album from another heavy metal hard rock legend. This time, this is Dee Snyder with Leave a Scar. Dee's got to be mid-60s, maybe approaching 70 years himself, and he just sounds fantastic on this album. I think it's no shock that his collaboration with Jamie Josta is going to give this more of a metallic flair. But these songs are really metal, power, kind of that power metal sound that's not really thrash. At some times, the guitar tones and the song structures sound like they could be, thrown into that thrash category. But this is straight metal. It's not hair rock. It's not anything like you'd expect from Twisted Sister. But a very strong vocal performance from Dee on this album with some really well-written songs that are memorable and catchy. And you won't be disappointed in Leave a Scar. All right, so that's the back half of the top 20. Here we go with our top 10. Lots of legendary bands. I know I've had some safe picks. A few out there, some newer front runners, but we've got a lot of the veterans are making their appearances here in this list. And this one is certainly the case. Again, I've said that death metal is not my go-to genre, but if I'm going to listen to death metal at all, I might as well just listen to a band that does it better than anybody, and it's tried and true. It's a formula that works. It doesn't disappoint, and that's Cannibal Corpse with Violence Unimagined. This album sees Eric Rutan come into the fold, where he does some songwriting, contributes lead guitar and production. The production's stellar. The guitar riffs are jarring. Cannibal Corpse is one of those bands that takes traditional groove-oriented thrash and heavies it up with that classic death metal sound, with the guttural vocals from Corpse Grinder. His vocal performance on this album is really good. Paul Mazurkiewicz is just consistently been a great drummer throughout the years, and he delivers enough groove and speed without it being so blast beaty that it melts your brain. There's really a lot of layers to be picked through on this album. You know what you're going to get with Cannibal Corpse. And like I said, if you're not sure about death metal and you really don't know where to start, I'd highly recommend you start with one of the bands that originated the art form, and that's Cannibal Corpse. You can't go wrong with this album. All right, number 9, another band that kind of defines the genre within which they work. This band arguably could be the inventors of power metal itself, and this is the highly anticipated, or was highly anticipated in 2021 album from Helloween, self-titled. Got some fantastic artwork there. This sees the band reunite with some previous members, specifically Michael Kiske from vocals, and you get all of those vocalists performing along with each other throughout the album. Lots of really good songs on here. Fear of the Fallen, Mass Pollution, great song. Robot King's a good song. Album closer, Skyfall, such a great epic, maybe one of the best Helloween songs ever. Said Helloween, you could argue, were the purveyors of the European power metal sound, which was kind of speedy but not really thrash, vocally kind of operatic, just not thrash, but a little heavier than bands like Priest and that kind of thing. You can't go wrong with Helloween, and this is I think a really fantastic representation of what their sound has been throughout their years. All right, that's number 9. Number 8. This was a real surprise to me. I have known of this band for years, but I've not had any of their albums. I'm not familiar with a lot of their early discography. I wasn't really even going to listen to this album because I wasn't really all that interested, but I decided to listen to it. And when I did, man, this is really, really good. It was totally not what I expected. I've heard this band defined as black metal, death metal, progressive, goth metal. I'd maybe go with the progressive tag for this particular album. There's not a lot of black metal in here. There's not a lot of death metal, but you can hear maybe little sprinklings of those throughout these tracks. But this is just an amazing album, and you just have to listen to it if you haven't visited this album at all this year. But this is Hermitage from Moonspell. I just found myself listening to this over and over and over again. I mean, these songs are just really, really good. And the big surprise in this album is the Pink Floyd influence. So maybe instead of being black metal, you call this pink metal. But if you've ever thought about taking gothic metal, atmospheric doom metal, and throwing in some classic 70s progressive Pink Floyd guitar sounds and even vocal sounds, that's what you're going to get. This is just really, really good stuff. I'd highly recommend you check it out. If it's not been on your radar, I don't think you'll be disappointed. All right, at number 7, another solo album, this time from a relatively newer metal guy, but he's been in the newest incarnation of a legendary metal band. Riot. This is the solo effort from Todd Michael Hall. The album is called Sonic Healing. And this was a collaborative effort with Kurt Vanderhoof from Metal Church, who I believe might perform all the instruments on this album. It does the credits don't really specify if there are any other musicians. But this is not your typical metal album. This is more of an 80s, late 70s, 80s hard rock, guitar anthemic driven songs, the kind of songs that these guys grew up on. So if you're expecting either Riot or Metal Church, you're not going to get that. But I don't think you'd be disappointed. If you like Scorpions, if you like Bad Company, if you like Foreigner, if you like, even the 80s Judas Priest, you're going to get a lot of guitar-driven, chorus-driven, anthemic songs on this album. Everyone's a winner. Every song's a winner on this. I enjoy it from top to bottom, and I found myself going back to this album quite a bit. So it's on Rat Pack Records. Again, that's Todd Michael Hall, Sonic Healing, coming in number 7. All right, go and stay with the Rat Pack label. Number 6, another solo album from an established vocalist who's becoming one of the powerhouses in today's metal scene. This one is a beast, man. This is Todd LaTorre's Rejoice in the Suffering. If you're Todd LaTorre is the vocalist for Queensryche, and if you were expecting a Queensryche sounding album, you're not going to get it here. There are some songs on here that have a little bit of that progressive Queensryche kind of flair, and that maybe vocal timbre and tone that he brings that is certainly kind of reminiscent of Jeff Tate. One thing I've always liked about Todd is that Todd does have a resemblance to Jeff Tate, but he sounds enough like his own style to not be a Jeff Tate knockoff. And in many ways, I think that maybe the last few Queensryche albums have sounded better with Todd LaTorre than they might have if Jeff was still in the band. But what you're going to get with this is that classic U.S. power metal kind of sound that straddles that thin line between power metal and thrash. It's not quite thrash, but the guitars are harsh enough. They've got that classic thrash tone, and the songs have those bouncy riff-driven guitar lines, and it's kind of falls in there like that classic sound of where bands like Metal Church, Vicious Rumors, Malaya Rage, bands like that kind of fall into place. This is just a beast. All the songs are good. I really, really like this product that they've come out with at Rat Pack. It's a double collector's edition, double album with the white vinyl and the album art on the label. I was kind of late to the party with wanting to buy this album, and I'm really glad I did. And I have, I think, I want to give a shout out to Darcy at 6 Strings 9 Lives. He was really big on this album from its release date, and I think had it not been for a lot of the interest by him and some other members of the community that were really high on this album, I might not have actually wanted to have bought it. But just a great album, and it could have easily been higher on the list. There's just we're in the top 5 now, and there were 5 other albums I identified that I either listened to more or just thought were really going to be there. At number 5, this is again one of the first albums I bought this year. This is from a band who's been around a while, but their discography, for whatever reason, has been a little bit difficult to get. They're signed to Century Media, but Century Media operates in North America and Europe, and the majority of the band's discography has only been available in the European markets, so to get them over here has been kind of difficult. But this is Angelus Apatrida with a self-titled album. A lot of, this is not their first album, so we know why bands release self-titled albums, kind of a message or a way to reinvent themselves or their sound to their fan base or to a new fan base. This is just amazing thrash metal. The band's from Spain. They don't really sound like anybody else, although I do think when they were recording this album, they might have channeled their inner fanboyish natures or ways of Pantera, because there's a lot of couple of times on here I really think I'm hearing that really driving sound that we got from Pantera on specifically the song Fucking Hostile, which was one of Pantera's blazers. But this album, just the opening track, Indoctrinate, opens with that really fast traditional thrash kind of riffing, and then it transitions into the first mid-paced breakdown chorus that just grabs you by the throat and grabs you by the ears, and you get that earworm in your head, and you're banging your head in your car or in your living room, wherever you're listening to the album, and it's just a joyous thing. But first 4 or 5 tracks do that. If anything, this album, toward the tail end, it kind of maybe loses a little bit of steam, but all the songs are good. They're all interesting. They all kind of have the same formula, and if you like thrash metal, I don't see any reason why you would not like Angelus Apatrida, so check them out. All right, at number 4, thrash seems to be one of the things this year, man. We've had a lot of classic metal bands, classic thrash, so we want to talk about classic thrash. You know, you've got your big 4, which you could debate all day. Are those the 4 bands that belong in there? But outside of that big 4 of Metallica, Slayer, Anthrax, and Megadeth, this particular band was on the forefront of the scene of the explosion. You could argue that they were equally as responsible for the emergence of thrash metal as Metallica was, as Slayer was, as Venom was in Europe, with what Venom was doing. And that is, obviously, it's got to be Exodus with Persona Non Grata. And it starts with that fantastic album art. Man, that is just so awesome, this album cover. Just really eerie looking art, and the inlays and the booklet inside has more amazing art on it. And the songs just some of the songs in this are just so eerie, especially Prescribing Horror. It's got such an eerie, creepy tone to it that's not your traditional Exodus kind of metal song. Gary Holt needs no introduction. Gary Holt has been with this band since the get-go, and I think that Gary Holt is one of the most prolific riff writers in all of thrash metal, heavy metal in general. You just always know an Exodus song, and so many newer bands I hear are so influenced by the sound that Exodus has given us over the last 5 or 6 of their albums. A really harsh guitar tone that is rooted in the traditional West Coast thrash sound, but it's just it's not being a guitar player, it's hard to describe other than it just gets in your ear and pulls your brain cells out of your head. But the infectious rhythms and riffs and the songwriting from Gary Holt is just amazing on this album. I think one of the biggest mistakes in metal ever was that Kerry King did not either allow or want to write songs with Gary Holt when Gary Holt was in Slayer. I think we could all agree that Jeff Hanneman was the better songwriter in Slayer. And I think I was always waiting for Gary Holt to contribute to writing to Slayer, and he just never did. But this is predominantly a Gary Holt album. Lee Altus, who is the second guitar player in Exodus, who is another metal legend. Just check out his work in Heathen. He's a guy that's been around forever. He wrote Slipping Into Madness, a great song on this album. I would have maybe liked to have heard a little bit more of his contribution to the songwriting. But again, if Gary Holt's writing all the songs, you can't go wrong with it. The Beatings Will Continue Until Morale Approves. Got that classic thrashing Exodus sound, the frenetic high-speed thrash leading into like the maybe slower mid-paced kind of verses and chorus. Just a great song. This thing is just amazing all the way through. Steve Souza delivers a solid performance. He kind of goes a little Chuck Billy on us a couple times by experimenting with more of a death timbre and death tonality. You can get that with Lunatic Liar Lord What was the other song on here that I felt like he did that with? A couple of times you kind of hear him experiment a little bit with his sound. I think he still sounds really good, but this is a top-notch album from a legendary thrash band. I think this is Blood In, Blood Out was really harsh and speedy, and it didn't have as many of the memorable moments on it that I really expect from an Exodus record. I think that if you go back to like Impact Is Imminent and Force of Habit, which I thought Force of Habit was a very underrated album, but it was more commercial sounding, but it had some really memorable songs on it that were at slower tempos. I think if you inject the kind of harshness that you got with Blood In, Blood Out with Force of Habit, and you combine those two, this is what I think the band was really lacking back then. And this is just solid from top to finish. This could have easily been the #1 album of the year. It stands at #4. I think that's pretty good. It was pretty late to the party. All right, number 3. This album, when it first came out, I thought this could have easily been the album of the year for me all year long. This is a young band out of same place, Richmond, Virginia. They get labeled as crossover. I think that's debatable. To me, crossover is always going to be like, DRI, Cryptic Slaughter, Cro-Mags, to name a few. I think this is just straightforward, big, meaty, riff-based thrash metal. This is enforced with Kill Grid. This is on Road. What are they on? Century Media, I think, is what this album's on. But this thing is just amazing from top to bottom. Got fantastic guitar riffs, really good solo work. The drumming on this album is fantastic. The vocals are spiteful and growly. I think if there's any band that's going to fill the void that could be left with Power Trip, and hopefully Power Trip will continue. Riley Gale was one of the more charismatic frontmen in newer metal, but if this band is poised to take over the top spot of the new American metal movement, along with someone else you're going to see here in a second. Just amazing. They're fantastic live. I had the pleasure of seeing them on tour with Bewitcher and Creeping Death when they were all on tour with Exhumed. And this band was so good live. I mean, the riffs and it left the venue reduced to a big pile of just rubble and shit, and littered with the corpses of cockroaches and whatever might have been crawling through the walls. Just bone crushing. This album's really, really good. So if you've not heard Enforced, check them out. Get Kill Grid. It's a great album. All right, at number 2. A band that I was familiar with last year, or a couple years ago when their first album came out. I knew they were kind of making a buzz, but as the year has progressed, this band has really picked up a lot of steam, and I just couldn't get enough of this album. This easily could have been my album of the year. I listened to this album so many times, and it's one of those albums where the joy and charm in it is in its simplicity. You're not going to find a lot of new fancy ideas. You're not going to find a lot of experimentation in this album. What you're going to get with this is just pure, joyous, kick-ass, thrash, speed, metal, rock and roll. It's going to fill you with that sensation that you got when you first heard this style of music, and it was such a kick to your face, but it was so joyful. And I'm talking about Indiana's own Wraith with Undo the Chains. Another band on Redefining Darkness. I think maybe the premier artists on that label. I can't say enough about this band. I was able to catch 2 metal shows this past year, and on on Black Friday, we had the Black Friday banger at the Black Circle in Indianapolis, Indiana, and Wraith came down and played at that, and a fantastic band live. I'm able to talk to these guys. They were great dudes. They autographed my CD. I was able to talk to them after the set. They were so down to earth, and just such a joy to talk about their influences and what got them into metal. And you know, I'm a grandpa. These guys could all, you know, they're all kids at my son's age. So it's just a joy for me as a guy who, one of the, you know, I heard Metallica for the first time. I was fortunate enough to hear Kill 'Em All when it came out. So again, listening to this album filled me with all those memories of what it sounded like to hear something that new and that different. Such a great album. Can't recommend Wraith enough to you if you haven't checked this out. If you've been on the fence about this, please get it. You're going to love it. Every song on here is an earworm. Undo the Chains, just a short intro with a fantastic riff that sets the stage for what you're going to get. Dominator, Gatemaster, Mistress of the Void, Cloaked in Black, Born to Die. Every song on here is a winner. It closes with Terminate, which is one of my favorite songs on the album, and it's got one of the meanest guitar riffs since you've heard Seek and Destroy for the first time. I hear so much more of old school Kill 'Em All Metallica on this album than I do anything else, but you can hear the D-beat style of Motorhead and punk. There's a song on here, Disgusting is the name of the song, that's got more of the punk influence. So, you know, you do get a few different elements on here that they throw in to give it a little bit of flavor. But this is just an album that you put it on, and when it's over, you want to listen to it again and again and again. And that, to me, is what makes a great album. All right. And along that line of thinking, what really makes a great album a great album? Well, it's got to be an album that speaks to the listener. It's got to be something that listener wants to experience time and time again and not get tired of it, not get bored with it. And this album, for me, is that album. Let me get a drink here real quick. Oh. Look at this fantastic tankard that was gifted to me at Christmas by my son, who knows me so well. I'm also sporting an Iron Maiden Sinjutsu t-shirt that was a gift from my son. He must think I have this thing with Iron Maiden. Oh, that's good. Enjoying a nice Trooper IPA. The IPA is a little bit fruitier and crisper than the canned non-IPA version. Not a beer snob, so I couldn't even tell you what the difference is in here. Anyway, there's been an album that's been noticeably absent from my list so far. I wonder what it might be. Oh, let's see here. Could it be? Yes, it is. My favorite album of 2021, it just has to be Sinjutsu by Iron Maiden. I'm very aware of the polarization amongst the metal community and Iron Maiden fan base that this album has generated. I'm not going to sit here and say that this is the best Iron Maiden album ever. It is not. But I have decided to judge this album and its merits for what the album is instead of what the album is not. And what that simply means is we know that since in 2000 and on, from Brave New World and on, Iron Maiden has had a different sound than your grandpa's Iron Maiden, which is my Iron Maiden. So rather than lamenting about the fact that you're no longer hearing things like you got from Power Slave and Peace of Mind, and even when the band started to get progressive with Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, which was fairly progressive for Iron Maiden sound back then. This is not a prog album. This is not progressive rock. Progressive doesn't mean long song long song lengths. There's been a lot of riff-raff about that kind of stuff too. I don't mind the song lengths. I'm happy with as much Iron Maiden as I can get, and the reality is on this album, I just love it from start to finish. Didn't start that way. When I first heard it, I wasn't sure what to think. But as I gave it more listens and more listens and more listens, and finally I listened to this thing a lot, this is definitely my most listened to album of the year, which is part of why I selected it over Wraith. Wraith very could have easily been number one, fellas. I love that album that much. But this album just, I don't know, if I coming more from my heart than from my ears, or a combination of both, I love it. And I think what I love most about this album is it's so cohesive. I want to listen to this album from start to finish. And I want to listen to it in sequence because I think it has a really good ebb and flow. And I know these songs. I can't say that that's the case with Iron Maiden's other 21st century releases. But if you go back to, anything back in the day, all those albums, those albums from song one to the end. And that's how I am with Sinjutsu. I like every song. I've had to pick, my favorite is Time Machine, maybe my favorite song of the year. I just think this is a really great album from a great band, legendary band, and I think anything that Iron Maiden is still doing at this stage in the game is worthwhile and amazing, and I would take an average Iron Maiden album over a stellar album from 98% of the other bands that are out there. Love this album, love Iron Maiden. I listen to this a lot, and I just thoroughly enjoy it, and I'm certainly open and understanding of the criticisms that the album has received. I don't look at it that way. I think it's great, and I think they still have an awful lot left in the tank, and I'm just so happy that in 2021 we're still getting an album the quality of this from a band like Iron Maiden, and I hope they still got some more in them. I just hope if I could have one, if the metal planets would align, Steve Harris would get over whatever late-age bromance thing he's got going on with Kevin Shirley, and they would go and make a phone call to Andy Sneap and say, "Hey, Andy, would you like to work with Iron Maiden?" Then maybe we could talk about, an Iron Maiden album that sounded like, Power Slave again. I don't know. But anyway, I love it for what it is. It's a great album, my favorite album of 2021. So that's my 20 favorite albums of 2021, my metal albums. I am going to do another video where I talk about my favorite non-metal releases, and there's one album in particular that I think really warrants some recognition. It's one of my favorite albums of the year. I just didn't think it really fit in with this list, so I didn't include it. So that's it. 2021 was a good year. We had some really good music. We had some tragic losses. I hope we don't continue that trend in 2022. Let me know what you think. Hit like, hit subscribe if you're new to my channel. Those of you returning, I appreciate you watching my videos. I know I talk a lot. This one's gone about 10 minutes longer than I really wanted it to, but hey, I spent about 2 minutes per album. That's pretty much all right. So I look forward to watching everybody else's lists. Let me know what you think of these albums. If you want to know anything more about an album that you're not really familiar with that I talked about, drop a comment. I love to talk about this stuff. And, if you haven't checked out the first video I did, part 1 of this, which I talked about digital albums that I hadn't been able to pick up in a physical format, and like 30 through 21, check those out. Those are all great albums too. So thanks for stopping by the shop. I had a great time talking to you, and don't be afraid to let them know you're metal. Bang your head, throw the goat, and I'll catch you on the flip side.